As Christmas snow blankets the quiet town of Brooksville, a lonely aging billionaire sits in his cold, empty mansion, betrayed by his own wife and children scheming to take his fortune. In a moment of despair, he crosses paths with 5 orphaned children playing in the park and follows them to their modest shelter. Touched by their innocence and warmth, he chooses to help. But when his new will is revealed, his entire family is left stunned by the outcome. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. A heavy snow drifted like whispers outside the vast arched windows of Whitmore Manor. Each flake fell with slow indifference onto the iron-wrought gate and dormant rose bushes that lined the long stone drive. Inside, golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over an impossibly long dining table polished to mirror-like perfection. But the warmth was a lie. At the head of that lonely table sat Charles Whitmore, 70 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, once now thinned out by time and illness. His once bright silver hair was combed with precision, though thinning at the crown. His face bore the distinct marks of wealth, tailored lines, smooth skin for his age, but the hollowness under his eyes betrayed a man used to being surrounded, now accustomed to silence. His tailored gray cashmere sweater hugged his frail frame as he picked at the untouched roast lamb before him. A deep guttural cough racked his chest, unexpected and violent. He reached for the linen napkin, brought it to his mouth, then paused, staring at the faint smear of blood hidden in the white threads. He said nothing. Footsteps padded softly across the marble. It was Henley, the head butler, a man in his 60s, more of a fixture in the house than most of its furniture. Quiet, reliable. Henley set a small bottle of pills beside Charles' crystal glass of water. "You forgot these, sir," Henley said gently, his tone always just formal enough to remain respectful but never quite warm. Charles nodded, swallowing the pills without a word. After a moment he looked up, his voice raspy. "Did Evelyn call?" "No, sir." "Lucas? Clarissa?" Henley hesitated. "No word. Miss Clarissa's assistant did send an email. Something about a late board meeting." Charles scoffed under his breath. "Of course." He picked up his fork, put it down again, then pushed the plate away. "Take it, I'm not hungry." Henley said nothing. He cleared the dish, eyes lowered. Charles sat back in his high-backed leather chair, staring toward the bay windows. The snow had begun to swirl heavier now, thick and dreamlike. After a while, Charles pulled a phone from his pocket and stared at the screen. One tap, then another. Calling. Evelyn Whitmore, voicemail. Again. Calling. Lucas Whitmore, straight to voicemail. Calling. Clarissa Whitmore. It rang. Then a brisk, clipped voice. "Dad. What is it? I'm literally about to present the Q4 pitch. Can it wait till tomorrow?" There was a pause. "It's Christmas Eve," Charles said softly, as if trying to convince himself more than her. "Yes, and we're trying to close a deal in Singapore. Big time difference, remember?" She snapped. "I'll call you tomorrow, I promise." Click. He stared at the black screen of the phone long after the call ended, his jaw tensed slightly. He leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling for a long moment, before slowly rising. His steps were deliberate, not slow, but measured, as if carrying weight no one else could see. In the study, the fireplace still glowed. Charles walked over to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of brandy. No ice. He stood in front of the mantel, gazing at the framed photograph, sitting alone between a pair of antique candlesticks. A young family. Charles, maybe in his early 30s, his face rounder, laughing openly. Evelyn beside him, holding a newborn swaddled in pink. Lucas, a toddler, trying to grab a candy cane. The tree in the background was modest, plastic, but twinkling. His fingers brushed the frame lightly. A faint smile crept over his lips, involuntary and brittle. "That was the best damn Christmas I ever had," he whispered. "You couldn't afford heat, but you gave me a wool scarf you knitted by hand, Evie." His voice cracked. "I wore that stupid scarf for years." Another cough shook him. He steadied himself on the mantel, then slowly sank into the leather armchair across from the fire. The shadows of the flames danced across the walls. No music, no tree, no voices. He reached into his sweater and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and faded. It was a drawing. A childish scrawl. "Happy birthday, Daddy. Love, Clarissa." A red crayon stick figure, holding a balloon in the snow. He remembered it instantly. Christmas night. Clarissa had insisted her birthday gift was his birthday card. Charles looked at the clock. Midnight. The day had passed. He was officially 71. And no one had remembered. He exhaled, long and slow, as if letting something go. His hand loosened, and the drawing fell to the floor. The fire crackled quietly, but it was the silence of the rest of the house that echoed loudest. Outside, the snow kept falling. Relentless, indifferent. Inside, a man sat in the glow of a grand fire, in a house filled with everything except what he truly wanted, someone to remember. Charles Whitmore stood alone at the revolving glass entrance of Whitmore Logistics, collar of his charcoal overcoat turned up against the wind, a black wool scarf drawn tight around his throat. The snow from the night before still clung to his shoulders, melting slowly under the building's golden glow. He hadn't called ahead. No chauffeur, no assistant. He hadn't been to the office in nearly 6 months. No one expected him. That was the point. He stepped inside. The lobby was cathedral-high, modern, austere. Marble floors reflected the steady hum of activity, secretaries, executives, young men in slim suits tapping away on tablets. No one looked up. The founder had become a figure on the wall, his portrait hanging behind the receptionist's desk, a younger Charles shaking hands with a governor, smiling like he still believed in things. The receptionist, a girl no older than 25, looked up briefly. "Can I help?" "Oh, Mr. Whitmore." She half stood. Should I call Mr. Lucas or—" "No," Charles said flatly, not slowing his pace. "I know the way." Elevator doors closed behind him with a soft chime. The numbers climbed. 32. The executive floor. As the doors opened, he was greeted not by applause or greetings, but by a hollow silence. The receptionist's desk on this floor was empty. Half the lights were off. The boardroom down the hall had its double doors drawn shut, lights on inside. Charles moved quietly, his shoes almost soundless on the thick navy carpet. He heard voices. "He hasn't said anything about his health." Clarissa's voice, sharp and composed. "He doesn't have to," Evelyn replied coolly. "You've seen the reports. He's losing weight. He can't climb stairs without help." Lucas chimed in, voice businesslike, a little too eager. "We've got the proxies. 81% of the board supports us. All we need is the new trust to be signed, and the transition begins by Q2. He's the founder, sure, but the market needs stability. This gives it to them." A pause. Shuffling of papers. "And what if he refuses?" one of the shareholders asked, hesitant. "He won't," Evelyn said. "We'll make it appear as if the decision came from him. Early succession due to health, public statement from the family, some legacy PR campaign. He'll sign it. He always folds when family pressures him." Charles stood frozen, inches from the door. Something in his chest, anger, heartbreak, something older than both, tightened like a vice. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. Inside the room, Lucas continued. "I've already spoken to Zurich. The family trust can be restructured. The majority of Class A shares will shift to the executive trust. We'll have legal authority to override any major asset sale." Clarissa added, "We don't need to push too hard. We just need him to sign before the end of the quarter. Frame it like a precaution. Stroke his ego. He still thinks he matters." The room chuckled, polite and poisonous. A pen clicked. "Let's finish this," Evelyn said. "We've waited long enough." Charles took one step back, then another. The hallway suddenly felt longer, darker, colder than it had a moment ago. His hand touched the wall briefly to steady himself. He walked to the elevator without a sound. The descent was slow. He stared straight ahead at his reflection in the polished doors. His face was expressionless, but his eyes had changed. Whatever flicker of hope had danced behind them the night before was now gone. Back at the ground floor, the receptionist stood up in a hurry. "Did you want me to let them know you?" "No," Charles said firmly. "Not today." He stepped out into the cold. Later that evening, at Whitmore Manor, Henley met him at the door. The butler studied the older man's face, ashen and quiet. "Shall I bring supper, sir?" "No, I'm not hungry." "Would you like your evening medicine?" "No." Henley hesitated. "Shall I light the fireplace?" Charles looked past him toward the grand staircase. the stillness of the house swallowing him whole. Not tonight. He moved toward his study. Just before the door closed, he turned slightly, almost as an afterthought. Henley, starting tomorrow, if Evelyn or the children call, tell them I'm not receiving visitors. The door shut with a soft but final click. Behind its silence, Henley stood for a moment, shoulders heavy, before walking away. Upstairs, the family portraits stared down from their ornate frames. Downstairs, in the heart of the house, Charles sat alone once more, this time not as a forgotten old man, but as a man who finally understood what he had truly lost. The wind cut harder tonight. Charles walked aimlessly through the snow-covered paths of Brooksville's Central Park, his breath fogging into the cold air, scarf half undone, coat unbuttoned, as if his body had forgotten how to care for itself. Children were laughing in the distance. Parents strolled hand in hand under golden string lights. A choir near the fountain sang a warm rendition of Silent Night. The world had moved on. The world was celebrating. But to Charles Whitmore, it all felt like a cruel joke. He walked until his legs began to ache, until the noise of merriment turned into a dull murmur in the background, and he found an empty bench under a leafless elm tree. There, the lights were dimmer. The snow blanketed the ground thick, quiet, and undisturbed. He sat down slowly, shoulders hunched, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. The ache in his chest wasn't just illness, it was the pounding realization of betrayal that wouldn't stop replaying in his mind. Their voices, their laughter behind the boardroom door, the way Evelyn had said, "We've waited long enough," like vultures watching a man breathe just slow enough to feast. His own wife, his children. Blood and bone, sharpened into paper signing machines. He wiped his face with a gloved hand. His breath shook. Was he crying? He wasn't even sure anymore. The cold had numbed his skin, but not his heart. A sudden crunching of snow to his left made him stiffen. "Hey mister, you okay?" The voice was cautious but kind. He turned his head slightly. A boy, dark-skinned, lanky, maybe 11 or 12, stood a few feet away, his breath fogging in the air. Behind him were 4 others, 2 boys, 2 girls, bundled in mismatched coats and boots. They were holding candy canes, paper cups of something steaming, and a small portable speaker playing a tinny version of Jingle Bells. Charles said nothing. The boy took a step closer. "I saw you from over there. You were kinda, like crying." "I'm not crying," Charles muttered. His voice cracked. "I'm just breathing heavy." "Yeah," the boy nodded. "That's cool. My name's Noah. That's Elijah, Kimani, Tasha, and Destiny." Each of the kids gave a tiny wave or smile. Destiny, the smallest, maybe 8, looked up at him with big eyes, the kind that hadn't yet learned to stop trusting strangers. "What's your name, mister?" she asked softly. Charles stared at them for a long moment. He almost said none of your business. He almost stood up and walked away. But something inside him, tired, blistered and bruised, sighed and let go. "Charles," he said. "Charles Whitmore." Noah raised an eyebrow. "You like the guy on the building downtown?" "Whitmore, that's you." Charles smiled bitterly. "Used to be." Destiny stepped forward without hesitation, and pulled a tissue from her coat pocket. She placed it in his gloved hand, and then, with bold sincerity, wrapped her tiny arms around his waist. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Charles." He froze. No one had hugged him he didn't even remember. He didn't move. Elijah gently handed him a candy cane. "You wanna come to our Christmas thing? We're just up the street, it's at our group home. They got lights and cookies and Destiny made punch, but it's kinda gross." The kids laughed. Charles looked at them, confused. "Why would you invite me?" Kimani shrugged. "You looked like you needed somebody." Charles opened his mouth, closed it, then without another word, stood up. He followed them through the snow, down the street, past flickering porch lights and quiet storefronts, until they reached a modest red brick building with a hand-painted sign, Brooksville Family Center. Inside, warmth rushed to meet him. The air smelled of cinnamon, cocoa, something vaguely burnt, but in a comforting way. String lights dangled from the rafters. A paper tree stood in the corner, covered in crayon ornaments. Laughter bounced off the walls. A volunteer in a Christmas sweater looked up and smiled when the children burst in. "Hey, you brought a guest," she beamed. "Come on in, sir." They guided Charles to a couch by the window. Someone handed him a paper cup of cocoa. The kids sat on the floor around his legs, chatting, joking, elbowing each other. Tasha played DJ on the speaker. Elijah showed him a lopsided gingerbread house he'd built. The roof caved in, like the projects. Charles laughed, an honest, raspy, involuntary laugh. Noah pulled out a small gift-wrapped box from under the paper tree and handed it to him. "It's not like fancy or anything, but we all made something." Inside the box was a handmade wooden keychain. "Best grandpa ever," it read in carved letters, a little crooked. On the back was burned, "From your Christmas kids, 2025. Charles stared at it, silent. His hands trembled. Destiny climbed into his lap without asking and leaned her head against his chest. "You smell like old money." The room exploded in laughter. Charles didn't stop her. He didn't stop the tears this time, either. No cameras, no press, no shares, no trust funds. Just 5 kids who didn't know what he had, didn't care, who gave him the only thing he hadn't bought in decades, a seat at the table. For the first time in years, Charles Whitmore felt known. And for the first time in decades he didn't want to leave. The next morning, the snow had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, silver on rooftops, melting the icicles that hung from the corners of Whitmore Manor. Charles sat in his study, still in the same clothes from the night before, the paper cup of cocoa half full on the desk, now cold. He hadn't slept, but he wasn't tired. His mind kept circling one impossible thought: they saw me. They didn't need a reason, they just saw me. He stared at the keychain on his desk, "Best grandpa ever," and then, after a long pause, he stood, shrugged on his coat, and without a word to Henley, walked out the front door. Brooksville Family Center looked different in daylight. Modest, yes, but lived in, warm in its own stitched-together way. Christmas decorations still clung to the walls, handmade stars and ribbons curling at the edges. Children's laughter echoed from within. Charles stood for a moment outside the door, unsure if he'd imagined it all. Last night had felt like a dream, soft at the edges, impossibly warm, but the keychain in his pocket told him it was real. He knocked. A middle-aged woman opened the door, blonde, round-shouldered, with tired eyes but a quick smile. "Can I help you?" "I was here last night," Charles said. "With the kids. Noah, Elijah, Destiny." "Oh," she broke into a broad grin. "You're Mr. Charles, they haven't stopped talking about you. Destiny's been drawing you on every scrap of paper she can find." He blinked. "Is that so? Come in. I'm Meredith, the director here." She led him inside. The kids were in the common room, stringing popcorn for a garland. Destiny waved so hard she nearly fell off her chair. "You came back." Charles smiled faintly and lifted a hand in return. Meredith brought him into her office. Shelves stacked with old files and hand-labeled folders, a coffee pot that looked older than most of the furniture. She offered him a seat and a paper cup of weak brew. "I wanted to learn more about the children," Charles said carefully, folding his hands. "Those 5, they seem unusually close." Meredith's smile softened. They've been together for 3 years. They came from different homes, bounced through foster care. Parents gone, some to sickness, some to things we don't tell the little ones. She paused, her tone dropping. "They found each other here. They don't share blood, but if you ask Destiny, they're siblings. She says they're God-picked." Charles didn't speak. His jaw clenched slightly. He looked away, toward the window. "They all carry something," Meredith continued. "Noah feels like he has to be the man, even though he's just a kid. Tasha keeps the room light, even when she's scared. Kimani barely talks, but he'll draw you a cathedral from memory. Elijah, well, he wants to know how everything works. And Destiny, she's sunshine with 1,000 questions." Charles let out a breath, long and slow. "They saved me last night, without knowing they did." Meredith tilted her head. "Funny thing about children, they don't care who you were, only who you are when they need you." He left a check that day, anonymously. Not massive, but enough for new coats, better plumbing, working heat in all rooms. Henley, when he found out, didn't ask questions. He simply began organizing the finances. "I'll prepare a rolling donation structure under a private foundation, sir," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "And shall I assume this isn't for tax deduction?" Charles didn't smile. "This isn't for anything." From that day on, Charles returned every week. At first the children didn't expect him. Then they began to wait by the windows. They called it Whitmore Wednesdays. He brought board games, puzzles, stories from when gas cost 30 cents a gallon and candy bars were a nickel. But soon he did more than entertain. He started teaching. In the common room, he arranged chairs in a circle. "Today," he'd say, "we're going to learn how to argue without screaming." Or "What's a budget? Why should you care?" Or "If someone gives you a credit card and says it's free, what do you say?" Noah thrived. He took notes, made charts. Tasha cracked jokes, but always remembered the details. Elijah once dismantled an old toaster just to see if Charles could put it back together with him. He could. Kimani didn't talk, but drew a picture of the entire class. Charles, at the center, with boss, scrawled in crayon above his head. Destiny asked once, "If you could adopt us, would you?" Charles didn't answer. She didn't press. And somewhere between those Wednesdays, something shifted. Charles began to smile when he woke up. He stopped checking his phone for messages from Evelyn or Clarissa. When Henley offered to prepare dinner, Charles declined, and instead brought leftover lasagna to the kids. One night, he told Destiny a bedtime story from memory. An old Irish folk tale his mother had told him when he was 5. She fell asleep with her head on his lap. He didn't move for an hour. Henley met with Meredith discreetly. They arranged legal reviews, long-term grants, educational fund plans. Charles insisted it be quiet. "I'm not buying anything," he said. "They owe me nothing." Still, every Friday there would be a drawing waiting for him. A lumpy Santa, a smiling version of Charles. One time, a stick figure with a top hat labeled Mr. Money Grandpa. He kept them all. The man who once dined alone under chandeliers, now sat cross-legged on carpet floors, teaching children how to split a grocery bill and use duct tape to fix a leaky sink. And every time he left the center, every time one of them yelled, "See you next week, Charles," he found himself stopping mid-step, eyes wet, chest full of something new. Not disbelief, not guilt, but wonder, and something very close to joy. The boardroom hadn't changed. The glass walls still framed the skyline like a painting. The same polished mahogany table ran down the center like a runway of power. But today, everything felt different. Not just because of the camera crews, or the lawyers in sharp suits, not just because of the uneasy shuffling of chairs, or the carefully worded murmurs passing between shareholders. It was because of the man standing at the head of the table. Charles Whitmore stood tall, trim, clean-shaven, in a navy suit that fit just right, not too rich, not too desperate to impress. His eyes were clear, his posture firm. His cane was gone. Lucas sat frozen 3 chairs down, hands steepled, knuckles white. Clarissa shifted in her seat, lips parted as if waiting to interrupt, but something about her father's presence made her hesitate. Evelyn wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Zurich. Charles placed a leather folder on the table and unfolded a single page. "Thank you for being here," he began. His voice was calm, deliberate, without bitterness. "I know some of you expected me not to return, that I would disappear quietly, make this easy." He paused. No one spoke. "I'm 71 years old. That used to mean legacy, stability. Now it means liability. A man out of time, a relic. At least that's how some of you see it." He looked directly at Lucas, "And some of my own family." Lucas blinked once. "I'm not here to argue, I'm here to explain." He slid the paper across the table. "This is my revised will, effective immediately." A lawyer leaned forward and began to read aloud. As the words filled the room, the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to disbelief, to outright silence. "I'm stepping down from all operations. Whitmore Logistics will be led by a non-family executive board, effective this quarter. My shares, controlling and otherwise, will be placed into a foundation, 60% under a new non-profit called Brooksville tomorrow. There were murmurs now. One board member leaned toward another. Did he say 60? Charles continued. Brooksville tomorrow will serve orphaned children and education initiatives in underserved communities. It will not be branded. It will not bear my name on buildings. It will just work, quietly. Clarissa's eyes narrowed, her hand twitching. Lucas's jaw locked, but he remained still. 30% will go directly to the Brooksville Family Center to develop life skills training, mental health support, and staff development. I've spent time there. I've learned more in 3 months at that center than in 30 years of board meetings. He let that sink in, and the final 10%, he said, looking straight at his children now, will be divided between my 2 biological children, on one condition, a silence more final than a gavel. You will each be required to complete a full year of supervised volunteer service in underserved communities, 1 domestic, 1 abroad. No assistance, no press, no exceptions. You will live like those you claim to understand. If you complete it, the funds are yours. If not, they go back into the foundation. Lucas stood. This is blackmail. Charles turned toward him, slowly. No, son. This is fatherhood. Clarissa didn't speak. Her eyes had dropped to the grain of the table. Charles straightened the papers, clipped them together, and handed them to his lawyer. It's notarized, effective immediately. And one last matter, he said, almost as an afterthought. As of last week, I am now the legal guardian of 5 children. Their names are Noah, Elijah, Tasha, Kimani and Destiny. They will live with me. They are not my replacement family. They are simply family. He gathered his coat. You don't have to understand. You just have to respect it. He walked out without another word. 1 year later, the snow returned, blanketing Brooksville in white, just as it had before, but this time, Whitmore Manor glowed from within, laughter spilling through every window like music. The once cold halls were filled with the smell of cookies, pine, and old jazz records spinning on vinyl. In the living room, 5 children danced in socked feet on polished floors. Noah was setting the table, straight as a soldier. Tasha wore antlers and kept making everyone laugh with her fake French accent. Kimani, quiet as ever, sketched them all from the staircase. Elijah kept fixing the speaker, trying to improve the bass. Destiny wore a crown, made of red ribbon, and declared herself Queen of Christmas. And Charles, he was in the center of it all, wearing a hand-knitted scarf over his blazer, with Destiny on his lap and cocoa in his hand. The clock struck 8. There was a soft knock at the front gate. Clarissa stood outside, alone, bundled in a beige coat. She held a small wrapped package in both hands. Her breath was short, nervous. For a long moment, she didn't press the gate buzzer, but it opened anyway. Henley stepped aside. He said you might come. She nodded, eyes glassy, and entered slowly. Charles looked up. For a moment nothing moved. Clarissa walked forward, and held out the gift with both hands. It's not much, she said softly. Made it myself. Charles stared at her, then at the box, then back at her face, the lines that hadn't been there last year, the quiet apology living in her eyes. He took the gift, and then he opened his arms. Clarissa stepped in. The fire crackled. The clock chimed again. Outside, fireworks exploded above the snow-covered trees, bright and reckless and full of hope. Inside, the past and the present stood together, no longer afraid of what might come next.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.